The following content contains discussions and descriptions of real-life crimes, including violence, murder, and other disturbing subject matter. It may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we jump into this harrowing and spooky story, we ask you to smash that subscribe button, and if you enjoy the video, drop a like to keep seeing more videos just like this one. Welcome to Criminality Co, where today we delve into a serial killer from the mid-1900s that inspired many horror books and films that shaped the future of the horror genre. Get comfy and join us as we delve into the dark and twisted story of Edward Theodore Gein, better known as the Butcher of Plainfield, or the Plainfield Ghoul. He inspired movies like The Silence of the Lambs, Psycho, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, to name a few. On August 27, 1906, Ed was born in the small town of La Crosse, in the state of Wisconsin. He was born to George and Augusta Gein. He was the younger of two sons, and his brother Henry was 5 years older than Ed. Ed's childhood was a very troubled one. His father George was an abusive alcoholic who had sporadic work history as a carpenter, tanner, and farmer. Ed's mother Augusta wasn't much better and was verbally abusive towards Ed, even though he idolized her. Augusta was the breadwinner of the family, owning a successful grocer. Augusta despised George, often calling him worthless and letting him have no part in raising the two children. In 1914, the Gein family up and left La Crosse to move to Plainfield, Wisconsin. They moved to a 195-acre farm because Augusta wanted to move away from the immorality of the city and the nasty sinners who lived there as well. They were nearly a mile from any of their closest neighbors. Shortly after moving to Plainfield, Ed and Henry both began school at Rochesserie Grade School, in a very small, one-room building with just 12 students in the entire class. Ed wasn't very good in school, just average at most, but loved to read and was excellent at it. Ed was bullied and isolated at school due to his lazy eye, and a speech impediment due to a lesion on his tongue that caused him to talk weird. Augusta would punish and berate him for trying to make friends, and constantly reminded both of her sons that they would turn out to be failures just like their father was. In 1920, Ed graduated 8th grade and then dropped out of school, but his love for reading stayed true. In 1940, Ed's father died of fluid in the lungs, and Augusta attributed his death to weakness and constantly reminded the boys that he ended up in hell for his uselessness and sick ways. Ed and Henry then both began taking on odd jobs to support the family, and Ed was often employed as a babysitter, as he loved the company of children because they were easier to relate to. Ed and Henry both were well known around town, and considered trustworthy and reliable. In 1942, with World War II going on, Ed was still eligible for the draft and had to go to Milwaukee to get a physical exam to see if he could be accepted. He was rejected due to the growth on his left eyelid, which caused his lazy eye and slightly impaired his vision. Eventually, Henry, not sharing the same idolization of their mother as Ed, began openly criticizing her, and Henry also began to grow worried about Ed's unhealthy worship and idolization of their mother. This only mortified and shocked Ed that his brother could say and think these things about the woman he held so dear. Shortly thereafter, on May 16, 1944, Henry died a sudden and mysterious death at the age of 43, while he and Ed were supposedly fighting a runaway fire on some of the marshlands near their home. Ed told police he had been unable to locate Henry when they arrived, but shortly after, led police directly to where Henry's body laid. The coroner, after completing his exam of Henry, declared that the injuries consistent with fire and smoke inhalation are not what led to his demise, but that Henry's head was badly bruised, and labeled his cause of death asphyxiation. The police dismissed the notion of foul play, as they did not believe Ed was capable of killing someone, due to Ed and Henry's great reputation in town. Later that same year, Ed's mother grew sickly not long after Henry's death and suffered her first stroke and had to be hospitalized. Augusta grew worried about Ed and his reading selection, which consisted of books on human anatomy, grave robbing and more. A year or so later, on December 29, 1945, Augusta died of complications from a second stroke at age 67. Ed did not take this well and boarded up his mother's favorite places, to be preserved as when she had used them when she was alive. Ed's mental and physical state began to deteriorate and was noticed as much by his neighbors, from their comments on his smell and his hermit ways after his mother passed. Ed had boarded up all but 2 rooms in the house, that were never reopened until years later when he was arrested. In 1947, 18 months after Ed's mother died, he began to regularly visit the cemetery at which his mother resided, and that was when he began his grave robbing, starting first with his mother's corpse, and twisted her head off with his bare hands. Ed took the head home, and shrunk it, similar to the ways he had read about in one of the many books he had. Ed would soon fall even deeper and darker in his ways, and between 1947 and 1951, would often visit different cemeteries all over, and dug up multiple coffins. Along this time, police began to become stumped as they also had an increase of missing persons in the area, starting with 8-year-old Georgia Weckler, on May 1, 1947. On November 1, 1952, Victor Travis, age 42, and friend, Ray Burgess, along with the car they were in, disappeared without a trace after they spent several hours at a bar in Plainfield. While kidnapping men wasn't really Ed's MO, police still believed he had something to do with it. On December 8, 1954, Plainfield tavern owner Mary Hogan, who Ed was obsessed with due to her resemblance of his mother, disappeared from her tavern. Police suspected foul play due to blood on the floor next to an empty shell casing, and later after his arrest, Ed admitted to drinking and hanging out with her a bit, before putting a .22 caliber gun to her forehead, and pulling the trigger. The day after the murder, Edward Gein admitted to a person he was working with, Elmo Yook, that he had murdered Mary Hogan and hung her up at his house. Elmo dismissed the claims as crazy talk from Ed. Shortly thereafter, Ed's crime would catch up with him, but not before claiming one last victim before his arrest. On November 15, 1957, Ed entered Mrs. Warden's hardware store to inquire about the price of antifreeze, and on the next day when working, Bernice Wardens, mother of the deputy Frank Wardens, disappeared from her store. Deputy Wardens and Sheriff Schley observed that the cash register was gone, there were traces of blood on the shelf, and a missing .22 caliber out of place on its rack. They also found the receipt made out to Edward Gein for the antifreeze as the last sale of the day, with the evidence piled up against Edward Gein. The next day, the sheriff and deputy showed up and entered his house to find a horrifying scene, where they found Bernice Warden's headless body, strung up like an animal. They also found many other items of gruesome nature, such as furniture and masks made out of bone and skin, as well as an almost full body suit made from women he had grave robbed and killed. Following Ed's arrest, he remained very silent for the first few days, eventually admitted to killing Mary Hogan and Bernice Wardens. Autopsy results show Mrs. Wardens died from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. Over the course of the next few days, police searched the entire 195-acre farm property, and collected an abundance of disturbing items from victims of his grave robbing and murders. On November 22, 1957, at age 51, Edward Gein went before a judge, and was declared incompetent to stand trial by reason of insanity, and was sent to a psychiatric hospital for schizophrenia. Though, over the next nearly 30 years he was said to have recovered mentally, he was moved around to a few mental institutes over the years. On July 26, 1984, Edward Theodore Gein died of respiratory failure in the geriatric ward of Mendota Mental Institute in Madison. The next day, at 6 a.m., Ed was laid to rest next to his mother's grave at the Plainfield Cemetery. As we conclude our exploration into the chilling life and crimes of Edward Gein, it serves as a stark reminder of the depths of darkness that can reside within the human psyche. Through our journey, we have uncovered the unsettling details of his gruesome acts and examined the profound impact they had on both his victims and the community. It is crucial to remember the victims and their families, as we strive to learn from these disturbing cases and work towards a safer society. Let us continue to shine a light on the shadows of true crime, fostering awareness, empathy, and a deeper understanding of the human condition. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey, and until next time, stay vigilant.